All right, welcome back to Getting Past the Premium, everybody. Gonna have a fun conversation today with Brandon Schuh from Christensen Group. And Brandon was actually recommended to come on the show when I was asking for future guests. And so I'm excited to pick his brain on how he's built his book and career. And I think we got a lot of unique stuff coming. So Brandon, how you doing today?
I'm doing great, Elliot. Thanks for having me on the pod. Appreciate the reach out.
Yeah, we were just talking about the weather and all the craziness this summer already. So
All the normal niceties that
yeah.
us Midwestern folk talk about, right?
That's right. That's right. Well, hey, before we dive into the conversation, let's have you give everybody kind of your background, how you got to where you're at today, a little bit about Christensen Group, and then we'll go from there.
Sounds like a plan. Like most, I think, in the insurance business, it was not at all on my radar screen.
Yeah.
In college, I went to the University of Minnesota, and I was a criminology major, so I was actually looking.
That's a little different.
Yeah. I was actually, yes, I had an internship my junior year in college with the organized crime unit for the Minneapolis Police Department. And then I was on my way to applying to a bunch of FBI, Secret Service, Minneapolis Police, anything you can think of. And I got an internship with a ladder manufacturer that one of my best friend's uncle ran at the time. I was just looking for something to kind of, take up the time during college, get some credits, that sort of thing. And this internship, I became close with the CFO at the time, and he became kind of a mentor to me. And right about the time that I was about to graduate, that ladder company, which was Gorilla Ladders, the third or fourth largest ladder manufacturer in the world, just got the Home Depot business at that point where I graduated. And all of a sudden, it went from this little, small company to a huge multinational player in the consumer product space. And my CFO at the time was kind of underwater and, looking for some help. And he would kind of ask me, would this be something you'd be interested in? So I did a big pivot in my career. I thought it might be temporary, but it ended up being pretty permanent.
Yeah.
So I started out in more of like a claims role, and then worked my way up to, after about 10 years of being there, to a risk manager. So I was the buyer for insurance for our organization. We had all ladders are very ubiquitous risk. They're in everybody's house. I think they're the most litigated consumer product in the world.
Yeah.
So I probably had 50 actively litigated lawsuits in my kind of my docket at any given time. I manage probably 100 different attorneys all over the world. We purchased insurance. We had a captive. We had all this stuff. So, I got to be a pretty good steward of our risk management program, and kind of understood maybe the non-technical side of insurance really well in that job. I wasn't a policy technician necessarily, but I really understood the ins and outs of what a client might go through in that kind of insurance procurement process. So after about 10 years of that, I decided I wanted to make a little bit more money, and joined the brokerage side. And I was a client at that time of Hayes Companies. Hayes was a pretty big regional broker at the time with about 1,000 employees. And I kind of came in there not having any insurance or sales background, and did pretty well, and eventually started managing the products liability program for Hayes nationally, and had a good thing going over there. Hayes got bought in late 2018 by Brown and Brown.
Mm-hmm.
I knew right away that a big global alphabet house like Brown and Brown was not for me. So in 2019, I moved over to where I am now at Christensen Group, which is a great setup. We're one of the only fully 100% ESOPs in the country.
Yeah.
That are brokerage. So everybody from, an admin to the CEO is an owner in the business. We don't have the buy-in to ownership, so it's a very democratized platform for equity, which pretty much does not exist in our industry for the most part. So it's a great situation, great move by me, although it was not easy restarting for sure. But I came over in 2019 to run our products area and built that out to so I run specialty now for Christensen Group. And it might be odd to hear that a producer runs a department, but we're very much hands-on technical producer empowerment here. So we certainly have resources and capabilities with our placement staff, but producers are encouraged to be very involved from a technical standpoint. So producers here, for the most part, are in charge of specialty segments. So whether that's construction or specialty or middle market or whatever that might be, but I run specialty. So I'm one of like 7 segment leaders here. And, I'm on our producer council, which is one of our kind of decision-making platforms because we're a pretty flat organization beyond our C-suite. So yeah, it's been a great move for me. I've been here about 5.5 years now, kind of reinvented my book of business, but still along the same lines as what I've always done.
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. I bet you have some kind of crazy stories from the gorilla days around risk management and such.
I got crazy stories in every aspect of my professional career. I was actually to go back a little bit. I was in between Tricam and Hayes, Tricam being Gorilla Ladders, and Hayes. I actually started my own private investigations company as a way to kind of familiarize myself with kind of the business development stage of life. So that got me interested in business development, but I was dealing with kind of the underbelly of society.
Yeah.
I didn't love that part of it. But yeah, there's a lot of stories for sure.
Oh man.
All over the place. Yeah.
Oh, I can imagine. Yeah. Well, and I love this perspective because you've been on the buying side and, the advising side of the industry. And so going back to your days at Gorilla, what were some of your key takeaways when you were buying insurance? When you think about who you were working with and who you were buying it from, like, why did you make that decision? What made you comfortable with the person you were working with and so on and so forth to get you to buy from them?
Yeah. And it's kind of a philosophy that I've adopted too over time, but I think understanding the industry that you're selling into is far more important than understanding the ins and outs of a policy. I mean, policy language is important certainly, but I think the structure of the policy is even more important. How to take risk, when to take risk, and what does that look like? And it's somebody that can talk fluently about the structure of an insurance program, I'm much more interested in than somebody that can tell me about all the coverages, the ins and outs of coverage.
Yeah.
Because there's obviously from the insurance, the underwriter down to your advocates or team managers and that sort of thing. There's plenty of people fluent in the forms that an insurance policy brings, but it's more, I think, much more important to the buyer is what does this mean for me? What does that risk taking mean for me? And what does that mean from a dollars and cents standpoint? I think it's the language that they speak, and one that I think producers can often overlook as a very important fundamental kind of relationship building block.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And I think, to kind of delineate those two, understanding your client's industry and your client's business versus only understanding the technical aspects of the insurance policy. And I think we both agree, you mentioned it, that you need to be a good technical, you need to understand the technical pieces of insurance, right? And how the policies work and what they mean. But I think it's to your point, it's far more important to understand your client's business at a deep level, ideally through, some sort of niche expertise or, working with a bunch of those types of clients. Because how do you know how to structure the policy if you don't understand their business? Then you're just creating a template or whatever to go and sell versus actually helping the client understand how these things affect their business. And you mentioned, what risk to take at the right time. And I think that's also a big piece of it, where not everything should be insured and not everything should be overinsured, or, you can be overinsured. And so helping the client understand what they, just educating them on what they could insure and what they maybe should think about, self-insuring or looking at differently or putting this risk management technique in place. So I totally agree with you. And I think that's often everybody always goes to the technical insurance coverage piece of it, when in reality you can get a lot of help, like you mentioned, getting that done, right?
Yeah, and it's getting kind of really getting entrenched in the kind of the detail of what they've experienced. Obviously, everybody looks at lost runs, everybody does everything like that, but looking at the autonomy that the buyer wants to have. That is, especially in smaller is the wrong word, but more entrepreneurial businesses that don't have risk managers and whole legal staffs. Entrepreneurs really are very proud of the businesses that they've created, and they're very defensive when litigation happens. So I think it is a very important part of that piece to understand, because if they don't have the right autonomy or it hasn't been explained to them appropriately, that is one of the biggest exposures any producer has to being fired, is something goes awry with a claim. And normally that has a lot to do with how much control the client has over that particular set of circumstances. So understanding that part of it, I think, is really important. And then finding creative ways to, take on risk, or creative ways to structure the policy. I think creativity is a word that is not often synonymous with insurance, but it should be.
Yeah.
Because just like advertising or marketing or anything else, there's a lot of creativity in today's risk transfer, risk financing world that can happen in policies that your average transactional broker might not really think about.
Yeah. So I'm guessing you don't take the copy, quote, and pray methodology in your sales process?
No, definitely not. We rarely quote anything, without the business. And I know that's fairly common speak for, most seasoned producers, but, we really like to slice it up before we ever, go out to market. I mean, it's one thing if it's new, right? Then, the world is kind of your oyster. But if it's existing business that needs a change, going out and quoting the same thing isn't going to help. So we certainly like to get a broker record letter before we go down that route. And, we certainly have kind of our path that we think works pretty well for that process. But no, I don't quote anything that comes in unless I think there's a 99% chance of getting the business. Yeah.
Yeah. And do you view that as, because the BOR gets sometimes a bad rap, it's because they can be used nefariously, right? But do you view that as more of a advantage for you, or more of a, or does it put the client in a better spot, or both? Does that make sense?
Yeah. I mean, I think at the end of the day, you can come up with a million reasons why or why not the BOR is advantageous, like in a vacuum. But at the end of the day, I think most of us view ourselves as a very important advisor to the client, like an attorney, like an accountant, like an investment banker, what have you. And you're not going out and getting 5 different rate structures or hourly rate structures from attorneys that might differ by a marginal 5 or 10%, right? So I think you really have to view this as somebody that has your best, kind of your best interest in mind. They want to help you. They want to protect you. You think this person is creative. You think they understand the market. So I don't think it's necessarily does the BOR help or hurt from a limited transaction perspective, but how does it help or hurt you in a very kind of macro scale of is this the best for our ongoing risk relationship, not just this one insurance policy?
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think I would echo that. I love the analogy of the attorney or whatnot, because if you think like the only difference in that to me is that there's a product in between, right? Or behind us versus the attorney, right? And
But there's a product with I mean,
yeah, why does that change anything? That's what I'm
with an
getting at.
attorney.
Yeah.
There's motions they draft.
Yeah.
There's a work product. It's just not so boilerplate, right? But we're doing the same thing. I mean, we're manuscripting policies all the time. Now, again, I'm not working in super conventional risk for the most part. I'm not broking a lot of like, BOPs or builders risk policies or things that are super ubiquitous that are out there. That's not to say that really matters, but we are manuscripting a lot of the forms. We're putting our 2 cents in there. Sometimes they get the stamp of approval, sometimes they don't by the underwriter, but we're trying to change how those things look to the client and how they kind of synchronize and harmonize in their best interest.
Yeah.
Just like an attorney would. I mean, if you look at a complaint, right, that an attorney writes for a lawsuit or answers to interrogatories or whatever it is, they're very boilerplate too. Like they have all the language in there from everything they've ever written, and they just like we do, they take endorsements and forms that they've done, in the past, and they move it over to new client and then appropriately manuscript them going forward. There's not that much difference in what we do, except that they're the ones that are, thinking about the legalese, the legal language behind the manuscription. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's a great analogy as well, going a little bit deeper on that one. Okay, so I want to take you back a minute. We talked on, the show before the show, about your kind of progression and thought process once you got into this side of the industry, right? You mentioned, you used to quote and kind of do all the standard stuff, and now you're much more niche focused and everything you just walked through about, understanding the client to get them the best program, but typically after they've gotten you the BOR, you've been named the BOR. So talk through that progression, like, the start of your career in that quoting and to say lack of a better term, phase to where you're at today. And what did you go through, to make that transition?
Yeah, I'd say there's probably, 5 to 10 really like big, like episodes that I had to go, like, or client processes that I had to go through before I kind of figured it out that, if you're just using yourself or your brokerage as a medium to give them the number, you're always going to be used in that capacity. So from start to finish, if you're representing yourself as the path towards a number, they're gonna first of all, they're gonna fire you just as fast as they hire you.
Yeah.
And the process to actually get the stamp of approval for the business is going to be completely numbers driven and not, advice and consultative and, advocate driven. So you can just feel it all the way through the process that something is amiss when you're quoting business. And not to say I haven't had success just quoting business, but I can tell you that the buyers that I have when I quote business are far inferior to buyers where I've built something with them based on a level of trust. So I think it was just kind of trial and error and just kind of understanding that, this is a better methodology than quoting. And, it's not to say that I was quoting a bunch of business early on, but, you come fresh into the brokerage space and the company you're working for has, a built infrastructure for how you do things, right? And you kind of follow that infrastructure at first because, who are you to doubt the infrastructure that somebody else has set up? But then you start to see how you can individually influence the outcome of these processes more than you maybe thought you could.
Yeah.
It is a very relationship driven business, and I don't want to sound cliche here because I know that's said a lot, but your relationship with the client and your relationship with the underwriter can have a big impact on the overall feeling or influence of an account. So you just you just learn that better as you go. I've always been pretty niche. Except with the exception of probably my first 6 months on the job where I was just calling everybody and anybody. It was one of those things like, well, who do you have on your list? Okay,
Yeah.
well, I'll call those people on my list. I got to tell you, I don't think one of those people on my list ever bought insurance from me.
Yeah.
So at
You
least
need
initially.
volume though. You need reps.
Yeah. So you take some bad meetings, you kind of just figure it out. But I had some early luck and success doing things a certain way. I'd literally, like, when I first started, I'd walk up and down the aisles of a Home Depot store or a Target or Menards or whatever, and I'd see a product, because my obviously strong suit is product liability. I'd see a product that I thought was, had the propensity to cause incident or accident, and I'd go find that person on LinkedIn, and I'd say, this is what I do, this is who I am. And I had, gradually more and more success using that model, but it's because I deliver a very specific pitch. It's like, we did this for 10 years. I know exactly what, you're going through. I have markets that can deal with this specifically, but more importantly, I can be your kind of outsourced risk manager. I can be your go-to for your first line of defense. And I know how to, react to some of these issues.
Yeah, and using past experience, I also think, a lot of folks don't rely on, use things that that you can relate to.
Right.
That's so impactful. And you've been in that space for a long time and you know it really well, so you can speak the language, you can understand what they care about, and I think that just it gives that initial prospect that warm feeling that, okay, what you're doing. I can, I'll take the next step and see if I can get to know who you are and what you do. But you hit on relationship there. I don't think it's cliche at all to say that the industry is still relationship driven. I think, there's all this push towards efficiency and transactional and, do everything online. And, there's a certain segment of our customers that want it that way, and that's great. We should provide that experience. But I'm definitely a big believer that the relationship still matters and still drives a lot of our interactions. But I think how you define that relationship is equally as important. So I'm curious, when you say that having relationships with your clients and underwriters still matters, like what does that mean to you?
Yeah, I think it's one of the only financial underwriting industries left. Look at banking, look at investment banking, look at loans, mortgages. They're all super transactional with very little room to maneuver. So I think that's the good news. The good news is there's still an ability to take something that's been underwritten and change the product. Right? Actuaries have input, underwriters have input, but you can change their view simply by, redefining the story a little bit, or, crystallizing the story a little bit, telling a better story, or making something that they maybe weren't too familiar with more familiar.
Yeah.
And the relationship you have with that underwriter, for instance, if you are just talking to this underwriter once a year when you have an account that might fit their appetite, you're probably not going to move that needle a lot, right? But if you have a great relationship with somebody and you're constantly dialoguing with them and you've written business with them, they trust you. There's this mutual trust between the three parties: underwriter, broker, client. And if you can use that trust as a kind of a vessel for success, I think it really can impact the outcome. I don't want to use the word favor, because I think it's probably not necessarily favors that you're getting as much as, you're opening up somebody's eyes in a different way. But it's probably a gray area between that and favor. Sometimes you get a favor from somebody, and maybe they don't want to do it and they're doing it for you, right? Because of that relationship.
Yeah, I had uh, marketing rep one time was in our office, and we had a client tell us that they're a decent sized regional carrier, and we were arguing with him because we had a client tell us that one of the big name shops came in and said, "Oh, we can write that with the same carrier, but we can get you 10% cheaper," type of thing, right? Just because we're who we are. And we were beating this marketing rep up going, there's like, what is that all about? Like, you need to go talk to your agents and like, come on, get them in line. Like, that's BS. They can't do that. It's state rates and all this stuff. And he looks at us and goes, do you want me to tell you what you want to hear, or do you want me to tell you the truth? And he's like, they're not wrong. Like, number one, if they have a ton of volume, they're going to get special favors. And do we like that? No. But it's the way it is. And then he goes, and frankly, people that we have a good relationship with that we know do things the right way, they're going to get treated different. I was like, okay, that's true.
There's a big difference between those two scenarios too, because I don't want to throw names out, but like, the Marshes and Anns of the world, they're very apt to say, we're going to move business away from you if you don't do this for us. Yep. Well, that's never a maneuver that I would use.
No, absolutely.
I use the fact that I know this person well, we're friends, we get cocktails on, the weekends or whatever. I have a lot of business in London, travel over there, go a few nights on the town with my guys over there, girls over there from London. And those are, I think, much better avenues to ask those favors than to try to lever somebody with numbers. But obviously it's implied, right, that you do a lot with them, so you'd like them to do you a favor. But there's a lot of do this or else, and I don't think that's a good way to do things. Yeah, it can be effective though.
Yeah, no, I agree, and what you're referencing is certainly the better way to go about it. But I was just when he said that, I was kind of like, I mean, it makes sense, but I agree with you. It's not the route I would take. But what you're mentioning is more what I would call telling the client's story, right? So why should this underwriter consider doing something different on this particular risk, right? And I would imagine, do that at a much higher level than, standard, business off Main Street, right? So talk through your process there a little bit. Like, how are you working with those underwriters? What are you doing to get them comfortable with what I would imagine some of what you're doing is otherwise, could be hairy risk or unfamiliar sometimes, or, unique risks that they need to underwrite?
Yeah. So the first thing I do is try to pair with another professional partner that really understands the business. And most times, frankly, it's a product liability litigator. So I try to, especially when I'm coming into a new deal, I say, who's counsel? Does your carrier let you pick your counsel or not? Most times when I'm coming in, they don't. So I've worked with enough very experienced product liability counsel that, regardless of the industry, and shared economy counsel and things, people, I try to pair up very specifically with the risk and say, this person knows your risk super well. They've drafted 1 million motions for summary judgment based on the disposition of claims similar to yours. I think they'd be a great advocate for you. And having that support on the other side, then I can call that person and say, okay, what's going on with this claim? What's going on with this guy? And I can really understand a submission, and I can really understand the product, because I can understand the defenses and the prosecution's point on the product. Here is what they're saying versus here is how we're defending a product or a service or whatever it might be. Yeah. So I like to really understand how the legal system views the product, or how they're broadcasting the use of the product through litigation. And most of my clients have litigation of some kind, because that's just where I like to spend time, in industries where claims are occurring, because I think it's more interesting than selling insurance to somebody that makes widgets or whatever. But that's just my little area. But that's how, I think I'm just, based on the fact that I was in the business for 10 years and now I've been in the broker business for 10 years. I think I can take a problem and very easily, not easily, but fluently translate it to underwriter speak, and vice versa. So it's, I can play that intermediary role where I'm translating both sides of it and hopefully communicating that point well and much better than somebody else could.
Oh, I think that's an underrated skill, is, taking what's an otherwise complex risk and making it simple for an underwriter to understand, and then taking what an underwriter, says or does or gives us and making it easy to understand to our clients.
Yeah. And I also like to get the client a relationship with the underwriter, especially ones that I think have sustainability. I like to get them in front of the underwriter.
Yeah, that's smart.
Whether it's dinner or drinks or golf or frolf, whatever it is, racquetball, like I don't care, pickleball. Just get them in front of each other with something that we can all mutually enjoy and kind of get that relationship started on their side too. So then it all becomes stickier. It all becomes, and they appreciate, I think the client appreciates you showing them how the process works.
Yeah.
Because a lot of times, a lot of brokers will try to pretend like this is all smoke and mirrors. I'm not pretending I'm a magician.
Yeah, no.
I'm just very versed in what I do, but it's not to say like it's not rocket science, right? It's just it is what it is. But so the more they understand that process, I think the better the outcome too. And likewise with an underwriter, I think they appreciate getting to know the client. And I honestly don't think it's something that happens that often. Now people might do Zoom calls or something with their underwriter on occasion, but I think it's important to get them in there and understand what's under the hood and how it works.
No, I agree. And I think, that's often overlooked, but is a super important element of any, any risk.
Yeah.
Okay. So before we start to wrap up, I want to ask you an off the cuff question. What's the most unique, interesting claim you've ever dealt with? Because you got to have some good ones.
Oh, no, there's a lot of them. Let's see.
You could tell we didn't plan this, everybody, because I'm hitting him right off the cuff.
Well, I'll give you like my go-to story. I don't think I've ever said this on a podcast before, so it should be relatively new to you.
There we go.
But yeah, I was probably halfway through my career at Gorilla, and I used to get pictures all the time, right? People would send me stuff in the mail, be like, "Here's what happened to me." And I got some weird ones, right? One time I had a pianist that fell off the ladder and had her whole finger and tendon all the way down to her elbow pulled out. So couldn't play the piano anymore, but that's not even the most interesting one, in my opinion. Yeah. But I had one where we call him MacGyver. And just as a little set aside. So I got a picture of his leg in the mail, and it was his leg had this big indent in it from what looked like a cable or something. So it looked like somebody like hung him by a cable by his leg. And I'm like, what is this? So I start reading the literature. I still don't really understand it. He's basically saying a ladder collapsed and something happened to his leg. And I'm like, okay, he's got some damages here. He had some big nerve damage. So I got to go out there and figure out what this is. So we go out, it's in Denver, Colorado. And I remember walking into this is just one, this guy's like 40 years old. And I I get to his house, and this 75-year-old woman answers the door. I'm like, oh, hi, is your son home? Oh, you mean my husband? I'm like, oh, okay. Oh, that was the first interesting part. Yeah. And he goes through this story. So what happened was he installed a winch in the attic opening of his garage.
Yeah.
And he'd use the winch to pull up heavy objects from the floor to the attic, but it was super awkward because the attic opening was probably 4x4 or something, and the winch takes up some of the space. So it's not like a super natural phenomenon. But he's like, so I was on the ladder as a 6-foot aluminum A-frame ladder, and I was trying to get this table saw up into the attic. I'm like, what? You mean like a table saw, like a big stationary table? He says, yeah. like, does that seem like a great idea? He's like, well,